When I was 10 years old, I was coaxed and deceived by my parents and teachers, and had to participate in the Provincial Mathematics League. The only request I made at that time was, don't let Gujuan sit at the same table with me anymore. Why? Sports Commissioner Gujuan looked at me with tears in his eyes, and I frowned in disgust, because you are too stupid. Then he covered his pencil case and left. My elementary school alma mater is not good at competitions. The average admission rate is only 1 road away from home. I am the only scholar in the school. The aunt happily sent me onto the committee's bus. More than 20 primary school students gathered together in groups of 3 or 3, and it was obvious that they had attended the same cram school. I curled my lips and pulled the shoulder strap of my school bag to the empty seat in the last row of the whole car. The boy beside me was reading a book with his head down, and I snorted secretly and said, "Needle." I have been gifted since I was a child. My parents took me to the hospital for testing and showed that my IQ was 15%. This led to my arrogant personality and felt that everyone around me was a bunch of idiots. The boy around me ignored my contempt and turned the book to the title page. I closed my mouth in a boring way. After arriving at the destination, the teacher began to assign rooms according to the list. I was bumping all the way on the bus, so I was so hungry that I rushed to the double room, threw my coat and school bag on the ground, sat on the bed and took a pack of potato chips and stuffed them into my mouth. After a while, my roommate pushed the door open and entered. I turned around while opening my mouth and biting the potato chips. The boy in a white windbreaker stood beside the TV, looked at me for a moment, then lowered his head and pulled the stool and sat down. I took out my student ID from my school bag, and the words Jiang were written on it, explaining in detail why I was assigned to the same room with the boy. If you want to blame me, my parents who think that the name is more boyish than to raise. But it will not take until 20 years before they realize that the fact that girls are angry will be able to marry. I jumped off the bed with a thud, put on my shoes, and prepared to go to find the teacher. When I passed by the boy, I found that he was working on a 3-dimensional geometric problem. I was stunned. You know, my intelligence at that time was limited to reading novels and comics in class. I could get full marks without doing homework. The benefits I enjoyed were already far away. The principal would greet me with a smile. I never thought that on a cold winter day, a boy of my age would have a prism segmentation problem in front of me with a normal expression. I was not convinced and thought it was just a coincidence, so I stopped and asked him, "What are you doing?" He flexibly turned the pen in his hand and showed me how much it was to calculate it. I covered my chest and still refused to believe it. "Is this an Olympic question? Are you in cram school?" He shook his head. "Don't you find it very interesting? Look." He held the pen and found a few points on the prism, quickly drew the auxiliary line and cut it into 2 quadrilaterals. I suddenly felt that the world was full of malice, because at that moment I didn't understand what he was doing. It's more terrifying than any nightmare I've ever had. I asked the last question in pain, "What's your name?" He looked up and looked at me, and then I realized that he had beautiful eyes. Although his voice was cold, it sounded very comfortable. But these are not the point, because he said, "My name is Jiang." This is undoubtedly the most desperate answer I have ever heard in my life. Jiang. Listen, even the name is better than me. It has to be said that children's competitive spirit is terrible. After the winter camp, I made a makeover, moved the table to the last row of the classroom, and began to concentrate on learning 3-dimensional geometry. During this period, I was completely mythological. All the students in the school took turns lying by the window and worshipped me, except for the idiot Gujuan. Gujuan's family has a very good condition. Every day, the nanny has to use a glass to heat him a bottle of milk, but Master Gu is reluctant to drink it, so he secretly takes it to the school every day for me to drink it. Although we are no longer a deskmate, there is still a cup of hot milk in my drawer every day, and there are also some imported fruit soup and chocolate from time to time. I don't quite understand his approach, but given that he's not as good as mine in the total score of 3 exams, I attribute this to the different brain structure. After I expressed my love for learning, my parents burst into tears all day long. At that time, skipping a grade was a very fashionable thing. In order to get a fashionable look, my parents used the name change to tempt me to skip a grade. But for me, a new question is, what is bigger than the sea? I turned around and asked Gujuan, who was reading the comics, "How is the name Jiang Yujo?" Gujuan squirted out a mouthful of Coke and I glared at him hard. He wiped the corner of his mouth and asked me, "Jiang, do you want to change your name?" Jiang sounds very nice. But the river is not as big as the sea. Gujuan didn't understand very well and said ignorantly, "But every river will flow to the sea." I paused, and the pen cut the draft paper. A month later, my family handled the admission procedures for junior high school for me, but I did not ask for a name change. That day, I walked along the primary school campus and unexpectedly met Gujuan, who was playing basketball on the playground. He called me from a distance, "Jiang, do you want to play basketball? I can teach you." I looked at the dirty basketball in disgust. He proudly raised a finger and turned the basketball. "Jiang, you have to exercise more, otherwise you will not grow taller in your life." I ignored him. I asked Gujuan to follow me to the convenience store to buy a bottle of soda for 1 yuan, bread for 1 yuan, bubblegum for 1 yuan, ice cream for 2 yuan. This is my pocket money for a week, and I threw them all in Gujuan's coat. In the hat, he ran away when he was stunned and confused. I skipped class openly. Don't know where to go. I walked to the gate of experimental primary school by a silly accident. I know Jiang is a student of experimental primary school. Their school has always attached great importance to the Olympic Games and memorized the letters carefully. I squatted at the gate of experimental primary school. After a while, like ants and leaves, I heard the ringtone of the end of Get Out of Class. I stared at the students who were coming out in a row. I was silently drafting in my heart. I'll see Jiang later. Whether he remembers me or not. I must tell him. My elementary school uniform is so ugly. But I didn't wait for him that day. On the way home, according to the number of students in the experimental primary school, the speed of each student walking and the number of people I scanned every second was calculated. It is concluded that the probability of missing the river and sea is 2.4%. Very small probability. But I just missed it. I feel a little uncomfortable. But I don't know why. My new life in a public institution has not been smooth. Because it's too far from home. My parents simply signed up for me to live on campus. The other 3 girls in the dormitory only treat me as a child. I usually enjoy laughing at my height and age. It's hard for me to understand them, too. It takes a lot of time and money every day on imitating other people's hairstyles and nail colors. But going to school has become the happiest thing I have every day. This is thanks to my deskmate. Besides having a pretty and beautiful face, and IQ that should be higher than mine, there is also a name that you and I are very familiar with, Jiang. The so-called meeting in life is. It was probably the moment when he and I appeared at the door of the same class at the same time. I rarely feel happy in my face. Call him Jiang loudly. He glanced at me in confusion. I must have completely forgotten my defeated general. But he walked to the seat beside me, pulled open the stool and sat down. The day was clear and the wind was bright and the sun was beautiful. My deskmate and I were very simple. He doesn't like listening. Always bury your head and read your own books. I am the opposite of him. I like to listen to the class very seriously. While distracted. For example, recall the cartoon I watched last night. Or guess what brand of shower gel is used by Jiang. At the beginning, someone will also come to ask questions about Jiang. A big question of 20. He can solve it in 3 steps at most. The other party pulled the corner of his mouth stiffly. How can this left be equal to the right? Jiang was stunned. It seems that he feels very puzzled about his problem. I put down the comic book next to me. Said coldly. Logic simplification process and mental arithmetic. He can't understand. I see. Jiang suddenly realized. The other party thought that Jiang and I had colluded to humiliate him. He left with the test paper angrily. From then on, Jiang and I became the targets of being isolated from the whole class. The taciturn Jiang seemed to have no idea of this. His world only has numbers and models. And I am even more happy to be idle. Especially every time I hear them say in a sarcastic tone. When the pair of genius children in our class. My mouth was so happy that I couldn't even close. But teachers are different from students. The teachers all like Jiang and me very much. With a concern for the future of the motherland. The teachers especially like to pick Jiang and I to the blackboard to do the questions in class. One person occupies one side of the blackboard. Jiang always finishes the calculation quickly. Atmospheric and chic. It doesn't look like the word an 11-year-old. I like. Every time Jiang finished answering, he started to think. This way I can come up with a different solution. When he returns to his seat, I can recall it. It's really hard to do my IQ. But I know that one day the river will find it. The person who can stand beside him. Just me. Jiang Hai and I are on duty together. That day, the unified examination results were issued. Even a discipline like historical politics that only relies on memory. We are all far ahead. A group of students with low IQ and EQ. Throw all the unfinished milk tea and snacks next to the trash can. Made a mess. I was very angry. Kicked to the wall. The river and sea react calmly. I won't ask for help at all. When I took the garbage alone. A clean body. He held a ginkgo leaf in his hand and handed it to me. I took it in confusion. He still had an expressionless face. Make a bookmark. Then we stepped on a stool. Wipe the blackboard. The white dust fell down. From here, you can see the girl who went home with her arms around her shoulders after school outside the window. A boy playing basketball. Closer. It is the long and thick eyelashes of the river and sea. The corners of his mouth slightly raised. It seems like I thought of something interesting. He suddenly turned his head and called me. My helmet was caught. My face turned red. He didn't care at all. Pointing to the formula beside it. Jump off the stool. Pick up a chalk. Look, if it's on both sides of this equation. Adding these items becomes a formula arranged and expanded according to the order. I stood beside him. Can smell the wind. Please, little guy. Then, this autumn, Jiang Hai and I were promoted to high school together. On the day of school, I'm holding a bun. Walking on the road without any haste. Suddenly, there was an uproar at the school gate ahead. I squeezed in. Seeing a shiny Rolls-Royce, the driver opened the car door respectfully. The young master's figure was revealed. I swallowed the bun in one bite. Ready to mix in the crowd. It disappeared without a sound. Unfortunately, it's still one step late. Jiang He, here should be Jiang Hai, screamed, gritting his teeth. When Gujuan learned. Although we have become alumni again. But when he was in the first year of junior high school, I was in the first year of high school. He almost scattered me with his eyes. But none of these matter. I stretched in the classroom in the high school. He turned his head and looked at the river and sea beside him. His bangs fell into his eyes. It's like a shattering moon. This autumn, Jiang Hai and I went to Beijing to participate in the physics Olympic final. My first time flying, I was a little airsick. Awakened Jiang Hai. He looked at me thoughtfully. Then he asked. Do you know the Tungu's Bang? I don't know what to do. Still nodded. Then, he slowly spoke as he thought. I've read a report. Some people guess. This is because of Trass's radio energy transmission experiment. I laughed. How is it possible? His particle weapon was not realized at all. Moreover, the electricity from the Wadankar Stupa could not be transmitted to Tungus at all. He nodded. But it's very interesting. Another time, while rehearsing a string quartet, Einstein was scolded by a large number of pianists, saying that Albert, you are good at everything, but you just don't know how to count. Jiang Hai's speaking speed is very slow and his tone is very calm. He occasionally paused, probably because he wanted to recall some details. But I was amused by his expressionless look. Thank you, I was moved by him. Jiang Hai nodded, looked at me again, confirming that I had been distracted, and did not put on my eye mask after the airsickness, and continued to fall asleep. Jiang Hai and I performed well. They ran the first and second prizes and returned to school in a swagger. They became famous for a while, and the media lined up to interview us. Jiang Hai was not interested in this at all, and was still reading books and doing calculations. Once when I was a break-in in class, I saw a camera taking a sneak shot outside the glass. I had an idea and patted Jiang Hai on the shoulder. He turned around and I put my hand on his shoulder, grinning with a tiny V-shaped gesture. A sparrow stopped on the branches of the sycamore tree behind us, chirping and singing. That photo later made headlines in local newspapers, the biggest myth of a talented teenage girl in 10 years. The school put it in the window of the bulletin board, and I liked to go there and sway. Unexpectedly, he met Gujuan in a flash. After not seeing him for several months, he suddenly grew much taller. I was in a good mood and wanted to say hello to him, but he turned around and left as soon as he saw me. The facts of adolescent boys' hearts are too difficult to guess. However, after the reputation became famous, worries also followed. Although the girls in the high school are not interested in Jiang Hai. No, although all the girls in the high school regard him as a male god, they also set up a support team. This made me feel so angry at the love letters and chocolates in Jiang Hai's drawer every day. She herself was also very worried about this and didn't know where to retreat. I think this is the time when I show off my skills. So on a quiet morning, I blocked the group of little girls who came to send love letters secretly at the door of the classroom. At the age of 14, I looked them from top to bottom with the look of a senior sister, and then I asked them, "Can you remember how many decimals after pi?" They looked at each other. "Do you know how to measure Planck constants in a regular laboratory?" They were confused. I looked at them mockingly, and the morning sun fell on my face. I said slowly, word by word, "I don't know what you like about Jiang, but if you love someone and want to be by his side, then you should make yourself better and become the only person who can compete with him." Then I turned my head and saw Gujuan standing at the entrance of the stairs. He whistled a little abnormally, and I found that he was not as stupid as before. He passed the group of girls, handed a bottle of warm milk to my hand, knocked my head, and said without any sincerity, "Please, little short." Jiang and I continued to create myths along the way. When we were in our senior year, when we won the first prize in the International Mathematics Olympics, the headlines we had made were already filled with school windows. At this time, Jiang had become an elegant and handsome boy, but we were still not very sociable. When taking physical education classes, the girls always play badminton together, so I can only skip classes. Jiang solution to this problem is obviously much better than me. He plays squash alone in the gymnasium. As his loyal follower, I took the racket with my will and wanted to fight him for 300 rounds. But it turns out that my cerebellum structure is probably the same as Gujuan's brain structure, and it is completely unusable. But Jiang never knew how to give up in his life, so from then on, when he played squash, I sat on the floor to draw sketches. With smooth lines and sweaty chin, I sighed while painting. The rivers and seas are really the flags that make people from heaven. When Jiang and I had no awards to win, the school's list of recommended gifts was also released. Tsinghua's admissions office called me to ask about my professional intentions. While chewing apples, I said, "I will read whatever Jiang reads." The other party asked me in confusion, "Who is Jiang?" I bite the apple core in one bite, and it was neither swallowed nor vomited. I had an vague answer. I was recommended to me with me, Jiang as big as me, and he received more awards than me. The other party smiled and said, "Sorry, there is no such person on the list." This is really awesome. I opened my mouth wide and swallowed the apple core with a gurgle. The next day, I asked Jiang excitedly with a pair of panda eyes. He nodded casually, "Well, I plan to go to the United States to study for a university." I looked at him stupidly, without blinking, then I stood up, rushed to the teacher's office, and told the teacher I gave up the recommended number. The head teacher was so angry that Jiang and I patted the table and said, "What are you two doing?" I tilted my head and thought for a while, "Teacher, do you know how to go to the United States?" At the age of 15, this year was the hardest year in my life. I studied hard, memorizing 500 words every day, playing 60-second sums in my headphones at any time, and the full book was full of English shorthand. Once, I was walking on the road while memorizing words and met Gujuan. He was startled and retreated a few feet in a row. "Jiang, what's wrong with you?" I gave him a blank look and said, "Study." I tentatively stretched out my hand and touched my forehead. "Are you okay?" I was too lazy to pay attention to him. Just as I was bypassing him, he ran up again. "Jiang, what book are you reading?" I silently shook the cover of the red book in front of him. Seeing a lot of English, Gujuan seemed to be blinded. After a wail, he covered his eyes and ran away. After a long time, my English test scores came out. I applied to the same school and the same major according to Jiang. When I received the full scholarship for the Department of Electronic Engineering at Stanford University, I printed the email and swayed it in front of him for a long time. After waiting for a while, he actually raised his head and smiled. I know that for the sake of the admission rate of middle school, Jiang and I also took the college entrance examination. The sky in June is extremely blue. After handing in the test paper, I met Jiang downstairs. He pointed to the purple gold flower and said it was like a sea. He was wearing white short-sleeved shirts, and under the sun, he seemed to have light on his body. I shouted at him, he stopped to wait for me, and we walked side by side towards the sunset. This is the 5th year of our acquaintance, but I feel like I have lived a lifetime. The night before I went to the United States, I was gnawing watermelon at home in my unchanging cartoon pajamas when I suddenly heard someone knocking on the door. I opened the door and Gujuan, who was half a body higher than me, stood at the door, looking at me with red eyes. He looked like this, very much like the expression he had when he hugged the boys in the next class in elementary school and fought. I burst out laughing. He gritted his teeth. I found that many times, when Gujuan faces me, He only has the expression of gritting his teeth. I didn't understand why he was so angry and handed him the watermelon in his hand. Did he ignore me? He looked into my eyes and said, Jiang, why are you always like this? You never say goodbye when you leave. I will never catch up with where you go. I stared at him blankly. The lights in the corridor were dim and his sad expression, but I would never forget it for my whole life. He said, Jiang, why do you never wait? The cicadas in Jiangtian chirped all night, but the lonely moon refused to fall asleep. The next day, Jiang and I boarded a flight to San Francisco. In the clouds, the whole world seemed to be just a vast area. The boy around him has fallen asleep peacefully. After going to college, I finally couldn't study sloppily. This is the dream palace of students all over the world, rich in geniuses and freaks. Jiang elected to take a double degree in mathematics. We live in the same community, and I rarely see him except for classes. On weekends, I would ask him to accompany me to a Chinese supermarket and have a not-so-authentic Chinese meal next to me. The chef likes to put a lot of chili peppers that are not spicy at all. During the 20 winters, Jiang and I participated in the mathematical modeling competition. There are only 2 of us in the team of 3 people, and the task is heavier than other groups. I moved my notebook and books to Jiang's house. On the first day of the game, we bought a bunch of pizza and ice cream in the supermarket and stuffed the entire refrigerator. The topic of the competition that year was modeling and calculating the weight of leaves of a random tree on the street. I am responsible for collecting data, and Jiang is responsible for programming. We were baking the stove in his empty living room to do calculations. I stepped on the furry carpet with barefoot feet and lay down to sleep when I was tired. After a few hours, I woke up and put on a quilt. I turned around and looked towards Jiang. He looked at the screen with all his attention, his fingers flying on the keyboard, like an elf. For 3 days, Jiang and I didn't leave the room a single step. When you are hungry, you use the oven to heat up the pizza. When you are tired, you lie on the ground together and play classical music on the speaker. It was already the 3rd night of Jiang and I. A knot popped up in his mind. At that moment, I screamed loudly and turned my head to look at Jiang. He was smiling and looking at me. His eyes were so bright, and his smile made me intoxicated. After I handed over the procedure, Jiang drove me out for a ride. We drove the Kinmen Bridge again and again, and the sea was quiet, but I knew that there must be rough waves in the depths of the ocean. There are countless stars in the sky. This is the first time I really fell in love with San Francisco. The day after the result came out, I was doing circuit experiments in the laboratory. I received an email forwarded by Jiang to me. We won the Standing Award. Only 3 teams in the world have won this honor, and the organizing committee invited us to fly to Boston to attend an academic conference to speak on our achievements and papers. I'm very timid about such a big occasion, but I have to go on the battle myself. Boston is still a bit cold in November, and I saw Jiang wearing formal clothes for the first time. At the age of 17, we were mingling among a bunch of bald professors, and I couldn't help laughing. The lights were bright in front of the conference hall, and his voice calmly began to describe my thoughts and model structures at that time. The boy's face was handsome and young under the light, and the faint shadow made him look even further away. He would pause properly and occasionally look in my direction. Finally, I heard his voice slowly and said, I want to thank my teammate Jiang for his company over the years. He is my only friend. The audience burst into applause, and at that moment, I actually cried. After the meeting, Jiang and I visited MIT and Harvard together. I asked him with a smile, why didn't you come here to study back then? He thought for a while and said embarrassedly, it's too cold here. I put my hands in my trench coat pocket and looked at him with a smile. Actually, I am the one who wants to say thank you. I have thought many times that if I hadn't met Jiang, what kind of person would I become? Perhaps I will still rely on my cleverness to deal with the teacher and exams, and spend my entire youth in a daze. He said, thank you for your years with me over the years. In fact, it was me who opened a door for him. On the other end of that door, the colorful world is so fascinating. Thank you for bringing me into the world of mathematics and science. Whether in the past, present, or in the future, I will pursue his pace for my life, just like a river chasing the sea. How lucky to meet you in this life. At the age of 19, Jiang and I went to Stanford University to pursue a doctorate degree. We were in the same group and we still lived in the same community as different tutors. Take turns driving to school every day. Even the taste is exactly the same. Even the tutor couldn't help but savor me while eating ice cream. When will you get married? I replied with a smile, he is in our motherland and we are not yet married. He was surprised, you are in the United States? In situations like you, maybe there are 2 children. I asked him with a smile, from then our children will come to be your doctoral student, okay? The tutor, who was over 50, turned his blue eyes and patted me on the shoulder with a smile. Summer is in our 3rd year of doctoral studies. We often write programs until we forget the time and are hungry, so we just find some quick frozen food to eat. For this reason, I found a Chinese restaurant with a good reputation nearby and posted takeaway phone calls from this restaurant around Jiang Hai's home. During the Spring Festival, as in previous years, I agreed to make dumplings together for the new year with Jiang Hai in advance, but she refused for the first time. I'm sorry, I've made an appointment with someone else. My smile condensed on my face. Why? Tian Xiaoyan, who was from a good family, failed the college entrance examination at the age of 20, and his family paid to send her to a community university in San Francisco where she was completely unfamous. The school is full of Chinese people, and the courses are very easy. In her spare time, she works for Chinese restaurants and delivers takeaways. By chance, Jiang Hai's understanding of Tian Xiaoyan was all attributed to me. Later I called the takeaway at that restaurant and she quickly ordered a lot of dishes. 20 minutes later, the girl pried open my door with a large bag of lunchboxes. This is the first time I have seen Tian Xiaoyan. An ordinary child, in his 20s, carries a bunch of vegetables. She wore a simple sports pullover and even her height was unsatisfactory. That night, I was sitting alone at the dining table, with the large table still steaming. I looked at them blankly, and I didn't even have the strength to hold chopsticks. These are all things Jiang Hai likes to eat. On a weekend when spring came, I asked Jiang Hai to go to Walmart to buy food as usual. When passing by the freezer, I paused in front of the strawberry-flavored ice cream. It was my favorite flavor, but Jiang Hai didn't like it. In order to pretend that I and him even taste the same, I haven't eaten many things I like in years. I smiled and bent down to get the coffee-scented ice cream below. Do you want ice cream? I'll get you a bucket. Jiang Hai pushed the shopping cart to me, and after seeing the ice cream in my hand, he shook his head. Please help me get the strawberry-flavored bucket. Strawberry flavor? Don't you hate strawberry flavor the most? I asked in confusion. Yes, he smiled helplessly, but someone likes it. After knowing each other for many years, I have seen Jiang Hai laugh a lot, but under the bright lights of Walmart, he was helpless and filled with infinite pampering. He smiled and said, but someone likes it. At this moment, I realized with great clarity that I lost. Everything I did with my whole youth turned out to be nothing. My whole body was cold, desperate, and almost speechless. But why is it him? I always thought you would like smarter and better girls. I don't know this answer either. I will probably never be able to leave it for the rest of my life. Jiang Hai pushed the shopping cart and took 2 more steps. Actually, summer is also excellent, but everyone's way of shining is different. The second time I saw Tian Xiaoyan was in Jiang Hai's apartment. I worked on a project for a month and there was a problem with a variable. I held my laptop and knocked on his door. The one who opened the door was Tian Xiaoyan wearing an apron and holding a spatula. He looked at me crampedly as if he had done something wrong. Jiang Hai is not here, don't tell him. I stretched out my head and a burnt smell came from the kitchen. Tian Xiaoyan invited me to sit in the house, and he poured me fresh organic milk. This was never in Jiang Hai's refrigerator before. I stared at the milk in the glass, and his exploratory gaze fell on me. I heard Jiang Hai mention you. You guys are really similar, even the taste is the same. They don't like drinking milk. I was silent and didn't answer. He continued, actually, I just thought, you are so smart, you have to keep using your brain every day. I drink more milk to supplement nutrition. People as stupid as me are a waste of drinking. The coldest winter is the summer in San Francisco, Mark Twain said. In June in San Francisco, I realized this for the first time because I suddenly realized that 10 years ago, in my drawer, there was a cup of warm milk every day, and the boy was irritable. In a word, what if you don't drink milk? Xia Tian sighed in his ears, and he said, I really envy you for being so smart. After I went to high school, I didn't pass the 3 subjects of mathematics, physics, and chemistry. I am so stupid, I will never be worthy of Jiang Hai in my life. Bar. Lenovo can make him a meal and can make the smoke alarm sound. I picked up the glass of milk and drank it in one breath, and when I left, I said to the girl with a frown face, no, I can't deserve it or not. It's not that I have the final say, and even God can't make the decision. I drove alone on the highway at night. Through the riverbank, I saw the brightly lit Golden Gate Bridge. A few years ago, Jiang Hai and I were still vivid in my mind. That was probably the happiest time in my life. I thought that two people would be walking side by side for a lifetime. And now, I don't even have the courage to take a look. What Tianxian said should be like this: the only one who can make decisions is Jiang. I have known him for 11 years. Over the past 11 years, we have almost been inseparable, but he has never given me the key to his house. I am his only friend, but not his only companion in this life. After finishing the course for the year, I asked the tutor to transfer, and the tutor said furiously, Jiang, are you crazy? Do you want to give up all the achievements you have now and start over in a new place? This will delay your graduation for at least 4 years. I looked into his blue eyes. Over the past few years, he has treated me like a kind father. I smiled miserably. Sorry, Professor, our children can't be a doctoral student for you. When he was defeated, he probably heard about Jiang. He patted my shoulder earnestly and asked me how to 20 in 3 along Fuvan Chinese. At that moment, I burst into tears. I set out for Boston. Jiang drove me there that day. San Francisco Airport is coming and going. He finally asked me a question I had been waiting for many years. Why did I lift my suitcase when I laughed? In fact, what I have always longed for is Boston with blood. He frowned and looked at me in confusion. I looked into his eyes, paused word by word, and slowly said, Jiang, I like you. The large screen for airports to play flight information is constantly changing, and red and green alternately show the haste and crowding of the world. His black eyes looked at me deeply, and it took a long time to speak, Jiang, sorry. We never say sorry to each other. When he won the competition championship, when I gave up the lead, when he was drinking coffee late at night to write the program, when I was yawning in the early morning to analyze the data, when we were tit-for-tat in the debate, when we were on the racetrack at a high and low time. During the past 11 years we have been together, it is as silent as a black and white silent film. We are moving forward together regardless of the wind and rain. We have never said sorry to each other. I always thought that I could walk through this tacit understanding with Jiang for the rest of my life, and I even thought that I was the only one in the world who could stand by his side. But this day finally came. He apologized to me and said goodbye to him. The plane took off in the roar, and I covered my face and burst into tears. I can calculate the most complex math problems, I can memorize hundreds of formulas and theorems, but I still don't know the probability of falling in love on this planet of 6 billion people, and I still don't know the calm and blue ones which sea will the river flow to. And I finally lost the only one in my life. I don't want to do it, I want to buy new clothes.